Okay, well, good morning and welcome to the 8th webinar in our series from Michigan State University Dairy on sharpening your dairy skills while we flatten the curve. Very happy today to have Dr. Dana Kirk join us to talk about methane digesters and how they fit into a modern dairy. Dr. Kirk has a lot of experience with the dairy industry. During and after his PhD, had experience consulting with dairy farms, both on equipment design, installation, and also in another role working on permitting. So he has a pretty holistic view of waste management, nutrient management for dairy farms that I think is terrific background for his specific focus today. So in his current role, he's a faculty member in the Department of Biosystems and Ag Engineering. He is particularly focused, he's the director of the Anaerobic Digestion Research and Education Center, and that's a lot of the focus of his research and outreach efforts today. So Dr. Kirk, thank you for your time today. Look forward to your presentation.
Good, thanks. And thank you, the audience, for taking part wherever you are in Michigan or the US or the world. So I'm going to talk about the current hot topic in manure management today, and that's renewable natural gas, particularly around dairy digesters and for dairy farms specifically. So a little bit of the outline for today. I'm going to just give a brief background on anaerobic digestion, the process, talk about some of the challenges of integrating it to dairy farms and some of the considerations, and then really spend a lot of time on renewable natural gas, because that's the topic today. And then a few slides at the end, just on my perspective on the current opportunity and considerations. And then I did include one slide on milk and digesters, because with some of the things that are happening around the country today, we're having to dispose of some milk or milk products. And so we do need to at least consider what that looks like for a digester. So what's this buzz about when we talk renewable natural gas? It really comes down to being about carbon dioxide. Well, it really comes down to being about methane in this case. Methane has a global warming potential 25 times greater than that of carbon dioxide. And so it's a significant molecule of concern when it comes to the atmosphere and potential impacts on global warming, climate change, and whatnot. And so carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide are kind of three of the molecules that are generated during manure storage. But methane is really the one that we're focusing on most, and we see the most opportunity for a variety of reasons. When we look at the US greenhouse gas inventory for 2018, the kind of the four major gases that are represented there, carbon dioxide is of course the most predominant greenhouse gas that we generate in the atmosphere, but methane is the second one. And when you factor in the fact that methane is 25 times more potent from a global warming standpoint, then it's a significant opportunity. When we look at it in the perspective of agriculture, of methane emissions across the country, how we manage manure makes up about 10% of our methane emission. And so it's an opportunity to really modify how we manage manure and capture some low-hanging methane emissions and turn those into valuable energy sources that would also mitigate methane emissions associated with natural gas and petroleum systems. And so there's a little bit of a twofer on the wind side when we look at improving manure management to control and utilize methane, and what that means then also from an energy standpoint. The anaerobic digestion process, and I think this is pretty well understood, it's naturally occurring. It's really an extension of what is happening in the rumen of the cow, and we're just doing it in a mechanical system as opposed to the body or the biological. It can operate or perform at a range of temperatures, from psychrophilic, which is really just a cold temperature digester, to mesophilic, which is where probably 95% of our digesters in North America operate, around body temperature, 95 to 105 degrees Fahrenheit, to thermophilic, which is an elevated temperature. There's some other things that happen with thermophilic, but it takes more energy, of course, to heat manure in processed water from a dairy to 125 degrees and then sustain it. I mean, it's difficult sometimes to just sustain mesophilic conditions in a cold climate like Michigan. So most of our systems are in that mesophilic or body temperature range. The one thing we want to avoid when we have a digester is oxygen. So oxygen is really our enemy. We want as little to no oxygen in that system as possible. So that's the anaerobic piece of it. Retention times, it's pretty broad. I mean, it actually could be a matter of hours for a really high rate digester that's processing wastewater from a brewery or a bottling plant to a 40-day digester that's processing, corn silage directly, like they have in Europe. In most cases, dairy digesters are going to have a holding time or a hydraulic retention time somewhere in the range of 15 to 25 days. That would be very typical of dairy digesters. The goal here is to produce biogas, which contains methane. It should be in the range of around 60% methane. If we have food waste in there, we could be greater than methane. Depending on the manure type, we could be slightly lower, 55% methane. But that's really what the revenue potential of digestion is that methane molecule. Carbon dioxide is the other major component of biogas, and carbon dioxide would make up the balance. So it would be somewhere in the order of 30 to 40% of the biogas would be carbon dioxide, but then other trace gases being hydrogen sulfide and other hydrocarbons. The other product is a stabilized manure stream or fertilizer. The biological process is fairly well understood. It's been researched extensively for 50 plus years. The power of biogas and anaerobic digestion has been harnessed as far back as probably 170 years ago, when wastewater plants around the world were using biogas and anaerobic digestion to create biogas to treat waste and create fuel for street lamps and other sources or other uses. So that's as far as I'm going to go into the biological process for today. What it means for manure, particularly dairy manure, there are a number of benefits. Again, biogas is revenue, but there's odor and emissions reductions. So again, ideally the manure coming out of a digester smells less. And we experienced that on campus. One of our drivers to build a digester here was to reduce the smell of manure on Grand River Avenue and on main campus. And so we've been very successful in that. And when we apply manure today, the odor footprint on a field that's receiving manure from the digester or digestate is very small. We do get volatile solids reduction. So again, we're breaking down the organic matter, or the chemical oxygen demand. And that's what we consider stabilization. There's less organic material in there. And so it's a more stabilized product. We see nutrient conversion. So again, we could expect 20 to 30% of the nutrients would move from the organic to inorganic form, which increases the first year availability of those nutrients in fertilizer. Pathogen reductions are well documented. Weed seed inactivation has been documented. And then downstream processing really benefits from anaerobic digestion, because now it doesn't matter which group of animals are being milked and which group of animals the manure is being processed from. It's all mixed together. It's all the same temperature every day of the year. And so if I'm going to do some sort of solid liquid separation or more advanced nutrient separation after a digester, it should be more efficient and more effective and easier to operate. Some of the common myths with anaerobic digesters is it makes the manure go away. That's just not the case. Again, manure is 85% water, thereabout. And so there's really no volume reduction or no measurable volume reduction that's occurring in a digester. We might see 5% reduction on campus. So I would say plan for less than a 10% reduction in the volume post-digester. But in most cases, I would plan for no reduction at all. The other thing is it doesn't make nutrients go away. When we look at the two primary molecules coming out of a digester in biogas, methane and carbon dioxide, there's no nitrogen, phosphorus, or potassium in those molecules. And so we're really not reducing nutrient content. We're just reducing the carbon content a little bit. And even the carbon reduction in digestate is only 30% to 40%. So there's the residue that's left over is still very good from an NPK standpoint. It also has a lot of residual carbon in it for soil tilth and soil fertility. Common digesters on dairies: covered lagoon or covered storage, plug flow, mixed plug flow. Pre-2005, those would be the three predominant digesters you would see across North America. Post 2005, 10, somewhere in that window, we see a lot more complete mixed systems. Complete mixed are heated and stirred tanks. And so from a technical standpoint, you just have more process control. If I'm stirring a pot on the stove and heating it, then that's a very different than if I just set a pot of cold soup on the stove and just provide maybe a little bit of heat to it. So there are process improvements that go along with mixing and controlled heating. And so that's why there's more and more of those systems coming online today. There are other innovative digester types that have been used around the country with varying levels of success. And that would be kind of the list there of innovative systems below. This would be, you might see 2 or 3 of any one type of digester in that list. They're just not common, and there are other challenges and cost and operating limitations that may go along with those. And so still today, the majority are really in the top 4, some sort of plug flow, a covered storage, covered lagoon, and then a complete mixed. In most cases, we're looking at above ground concrete or steel tanks. A digester tour is really not very exciting. Just depends on what color it comes into, how tall it is, if it's got a hard roof or a bubble roof. But the physical tour of a digester itself is a pretty short tour because there's just not a lot of stuff to see on the outside. Covered lagoons, again, kind of just taking your long-term manure storage and pulling a top over it, and then running some sort of gas collection system coming off of that. High solids, again, this is one I often overlook and dismiss just because I'm a complete mixed bias person. But we've done a high solids digester with the Detroit Zoo. You can kind of see the material that goes into it. And it's almost like anaerobic composting, where they're loading these bays with a really thick, dense material, closing the door, and then letting that biological process, that digestion, occur for upwards of 25 to 35 days, and then removing it and continuing to compost aerobically to convert it and add value. So the systems work. Again, it really depends on the goals and the ideals behind the project and what you're looking for. Again, all of these different types of digesters come with different loading ranges. So again, total solids, we're going to see a range at which these systems are best suited. How much manure and other feedstock we can put into them, we call that the loading rate, will vary. Retention time varies, and then kind of the operation, the level of sophistication on the operations will vary across these technologies. Digesters across the United States, right now we're probably around 280 to 300 operating digesters. The red dots are dairies, greens are hog, purplish is poultry, a couple of beef systems in blue, and then the gray dots are complete mixed. The size of the dot, I think, is based on kind of the energy output and impact of that digester or that digester footprint. When we look in Michigan, by this assessment, we have 8 systems operating on farms. I think actually today we have 5, mostly on dairy farms, and they're either using 100% dairy manure or they're using a mix. Our system here in East Lansing is actually considered a mixed digester, so we need to get that reclassified. But again, AgStar provides a nice resource for just some basic anaerobic digestion information, and is a good tool to utilize if you're starting to look at what a digester means for your farm. Anaerobic digestion in dairy manure. Dairy manure is probably one of the easiest materials there is to make biogas from. At the end of the day, as it comes out of the cow, it's already anaerobic. It's already gone through fermentation in the stomach, in the rumen. And so all we're doing is really harnessing that biological community that's in the manure and giving it a longer time with no oxygen to produce more energy, more methane for us. And so It's a very easy material to work with, but it's very difficult to integrate anaerobic digestion onto dairy farms. Dairy farms are not cookie cutter, and there's so much variability in how they're operated, how they're constructed, whether it's a type. You've got a dry lot in the upper corner. We've got a lot of freestall barns with sand bedding here. How manure is collected, what treatment is occurring, what storage is occurring, the bedding, the age and the makeup of the herd, what additives and what animal health products may be or may not be used on the farm, and then other contaminants. Again, rocks, metal, wood, a lot of debris that we use on dairy farms could end up in that manure stream and cause problems with digesters. And so while it's super easy to make biogas and methane from manure, successful integration onto the farm does take some serious consideration and some thoughtful planning and design. I'm not going to go through all of those kind of impacts of a dairy farm and how they impact it, but we're going to hit on a couple of high points. Manure characteristics vary. So again, when we look at the farm type, housing, and then bedding, and how frequently we collect manure and how we collect manure, has a major impact on the total solids, volatile solids, fixed solids, which in this case is inorganic material, and then that volatile solids to total solids ratio. So these are all kind of numbers that we look at when we're trying to figure out how much biogas we can get out of manure and how to design a digester system. So when we go from as excreted to a sand separator effluent, we could go from 12 to 13% volatile solids down to 3%. When we look at collecting manure off of a dry lot dairy, if we get it on a daily basis, or if we get it as excreted, so I would say every time the cow leaves the barn to go to the milking center, it's going to be 14% total solids. If it sits there for any length of time in a warm environment, it starts to dry out and that total solids number goes up because the moisture level is going down. And then the longer we leave it, the more that occurs. And we also are losing volatile solids throughout that process just due to kind of natural degradation that's occurring. So there's a lot about how we collect manure and how frequently we collect it and what kind of barns and farm it's coming out of that impacts what it looks like when we send it to a digester. Common bedding materials, again, speaking kind of to the industry, so no surprise here, manure fiber, straw, sand, and other organics. Sand is a problem. It wears and tears on equipment. It adds volume to the manure stream. It settles out very, very rapidly and just can cause real problems. When we look at removing sand, we've got passive and mechanical systems out there that work very well. I mean, we can get 85 to 95% sand removal. You know, we might have to use 1, 2, or 3 steps in the process to get there. But at the same time as we're removing sand, we're going to lose some volatile solids. I don't think anyone would say that their sand off of a sand recovery system is perfectly clean. There is organic material in it. There's manure residue in it, and that is volatile solids that are being lost. And so we do need to factor in and consider what's the change in gas production on how we manage bedding. If I add manure fiber back, I'm adding solids in volatile solids and organic matter back into the system, but it's already been through a digester once. It's already been through a cow's stomach, so it's pretty tough material, and it may actually not add any biogas potential. So bedding and how we manage bedding will, again, influence how we design a system and how much gas we can expect to produce. And then bedding additives, if we're adding anything to like a lime or antimicrobial to a bedding, of course, that will also have an impact because we're looking at a biological conversion of manure to gas. You know, kind of continuing on that as we look at, sorry, trying to get my laser pointer back. You know, raw manure coming out of a cow is going to generate somewhere in the order of 5 to 8 cubic feet of biogas per pound of volatile solids. Sand separator effluents, so from some of the work we've done, right around 6 to 6.5. As excreted manure, you know, could be as high as 9 in some cases, but then we see an erosion of that gas potential depending on how we collect it. So again, just driving home that point, how we manage manure does impact what we can make for biogas out of it and what the value is. Other factors, manure age, again, the older it is, the less gas that's there. Animal health and animal products do have an impact. This is a plot of our gas production. Normally we're right around 100 to 140,000 cubic feet of, 1,000 cubic feet of gas a day from our project here on campus. But when we have feed trials going on and communication breakdowns occur, we can see a pretty significant erosion of that biogas production when we're trying to do some research activities and we haven't properly isolated or accounted for that manure. So this is something that has to be evaluated and managed, and how additives are used in the farm does have an impact. So digester revenue sources. Traditionally, it's been electricity and we believe digestate, though I'm not sure anyone has ever gotten rich off of selling manure. So our revenue sources pre-2016, 2017 were largely driven by selling electricity to the state grids, and driven by state-specific renewable portfolio standards. Post 2016, 17, and kind of where we're at today, it is 95% driven by renewable natural gas. There's a few states around the country that have really good electrical incentives that may be still pushing digesters to go to electricity, but 95% or more of the projects that are being discussed and developed today and evaluated are focused on creating a commodity natural gas, so pipeline quality that we can inject and use at our homes and offices and anywhere else, just like we use natural gas today. Generating a renewable fuel standard RIN, or a renewable identification number, and generating a low carbon fuel standard credit. The RFS RIN and the low carbon fuel standard credit are the real money makers when it comes to RNG today. Carbon dioxide is a potential area that we could still see some revenue from. A lot of uses for carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide is a byproduct of this process. And so that may be kind of an untapped opportunity in the future. So what we're looking at here when we talk biogas is, I think it's pretty well accepted. When we put manure in storage, there's an emission that occurs. If we do digestion before storage, we're going to reduce the storage emissions after the digester. And that reduction is the additionality, and that's really the value proposition for digesters, is what can we reduce our baseline emission by, and how can we then monetize that? So I'll walk through, I'm not going to talk about the commodity price. Natural gas prices, as we know, are at all-time lows, and probably this week with the oil prices tanking out even more, oil prices or natural gas prices will probably kind of follow even lower than where they're at. But the commodity doesn't generate a tremendous amount of revenue, but it is there. The renewable fuel standard was really the first policy that started to kind of change this dynamic. And it goes back to the 2005, 2007 years. And what it requires is renewable fuel to replace or reduce the quantity of petroleum-based transportation fuel, heating oil, and jet fuel. So this is the policy that created our ethanol market. Obligated parties, so refiners, retailers, transporters, have to have a quantity of renewable identification numbers. And those have to come from, certain buckets of renewable fuel sources. The RINs, as they're called, are measured against ethanol equivalents, and they are dropped into what's called a D code based on their fuel, based on the feedstock and the fuel production process. So the fuel categories here are D6, which is our ethanol market for the most part. D5, which is advanced biofuel. This would be biodiesels. This is our digester if we were making renewable natural gas here on campus, because we're highly mixed with food waste and manure. D3, which is cellulosic, hemicellulosic, and lignin-based fuels. So this would be woody biomass and livestock manure and crop residues. So this is the bucket that is really kind of the hot topic when it comes to on-farm digesters, whether you're a dairy or a swine. And then biomass-based diesel is a D4. What these buckets mean is they're really looking at the overall greenhouse gas, the life cycle greenhouse gas emission reductions. And so the D3, where dairy manure sits, is a pretty significant 60% potential life cycle reduction on greenhouse gas. that's the D3. The D6 ethanol is only a 20%, and so typically that's going to generate a lower value product or a lower value in the marketplace. These renewable fuels are what's considered a nested concept. So D6 is the biggest bucket. Of course, it's been there for the longest, and that's the ethanol bucket. Everything else fits inside of that. D4 and D3 aren't necessarily nested, but D3 and D4 could fulfill the D5 or D6 requirement. And so again, having this being the smallest, it can generate the highest values. What's changing with the renewable fuel standard is the target of where these fuels come from is changing. When we started this policy, it was all ethanol based, D6. By 2022, the bucket of D6 and the bucket of D3 renewable energies are almost equal. And so we're having a significant ramp up 2017 to 2022 in what we're looking for in the cellulosic category. And that's driven project development and driven part of the revenue generation potential of these projects. As I kind of just to reiterate, what qualifies as a D3, landfill gas is approved. Biogas from wastewater, activated sludge and biosolids is an approved pathway. And then anaerobic digesters that are treating animal manure, crop residue, or separated yard waste, so grass clippings and other things. Those are the automatically approved D3 feedstocks. There is work on approving other feedstocks into this, but it's been very slow to occur. Though there's a lot of push from lobbying groups like the American Biogas Industry and others to get more fuels into D3. Fuels that are not from a 75% cellulosic threshold or don't meet this threshold are considered D5. So again, if I'm using food processing waste in our digester here on campus, that is considered a D5 gas and is priced accordingly due to the greenhouse gas. And so when we look at, this is the March 2020 market data, D6 was about 19 cents a credit. D3 was, I'm sorry, D3 verified was $1.33, unverified was 50 cents, and then D5s were 40. So if I'm a qualified, verified D3 RIN, I'm netting about $1 more than a D5 RIN or a mixed digester biogas. So there is a significant value jump here. Historically, you know, the D3, D4, D5s have been pretty flat over the last 2 years or 18 months. D3s have had some volatility. We dropped pretty low in September of 2019, October of 2019. We've rebounded. So we're just a little bit below the highs of January of 2019 when it was a little bit above $2 a RIN credit. So today we're sitting somewhere around that $1.30 to $1.40 range. The second the second policy that's in place and actually the real driver is the low carbon fuel standard out of California. Other West Coast states are looking at their own state specific low carbon fuel standard. California's is in place and has been tested and is the market driver right now. The goal of this policy is to reduce carbon intensity of the fuel pool, the transportation fuel pool, by 10% by 2020. It's administered by the California Air Resource Board. The carbon intensity or the CI score of a fuel is generated using the GREET model, which is a greenhouse gas regulated emission energy and use in transportation model that's been around for a while. And it looks again at the life cycle greenhouse gas emissions of a fuel. CI, carbon intensity, is expressed in grams of carbon dioxide equivalent per megajoule of energy generated. So that's kind of the ugly policy information real quick there. What this means is California's transportation pool is looking to lower their overall establishment or carbon dioxide emissions. Again, obligated parties, I don't think that's the right term for California, but parties that are involved in oil and gas processing, refining, distribution, and use are required to do some reduction practices here. And so that's really the demand side of this equation. Fuel producers generate and acquire credits for compliance. So again, if I'm an oil refiner, I can do practices that reduce my carbon dioxide emissions, and I can generate them myself, or I can go out to the marketplace and I can purchase those if the purchase price is cheaper than what it would take me to come into compliance. So the regulated parties, that's the proper term. Importers, refiners, wholesalers, those are some of the key regulated parties. And only those regulated parties can hold credits. Credits don't expire, but they do need to be moved from the generator to a regulated party. So what this has looked at, or what this has done for California, has resulted in a 2018 about a 5% reduction in carbon intensity of the transportation fuel. So that's a pretty significant change. As they move out to 2030, they're looking to get down to a 20% reduction in that carbon intensity of the fuel supply there. When they look at carbon intensity of different fuels, just to give you some comparisons, gasoline sits at about a 95. Midwest ethanol is slightly better. Brazilian sugarcane ethanol is in the 70s. Natural gas is in the high 60s, depending on where it's at, maybe low 60s if it's generated in California. Landfill gas and dairy digester biogas, right around 10 to 14 on a carbon intensity scale. So you can see a significant reduction in the carbon intensity of fuel generated, transportation fuel generated from landfill gas or dairy digester biogas. Oh, there's my red box. So again, looking at kind of a plot of performance over the last 8 to 9 years, you can see kind of the volume in the blue bars and then the price points. And so 2019-20 are projected to have values around $200 a credit, and that's $1 per metric ton of reduction. And so a significant dollar value and a significant change in the dollar value over the last 3 years for those LCFS credits. And that has really been followed by a big buzz and interest in building digesters on dairy farms to tap into this marketplace. So factors that influence CI score, again, if you're a dairy producer, you need to kind of think about how you fit into this space. Qualifiers, again, you need to have long-term storage is what it comes down to. So you need storage depths that really exceed a meter in depth, so 3.5 feet, a little over 3 feet, which again, for a Michigan manure storage, generally they're going to be 10 plus feet deep. So that's an easy one to check in most cases. And then you need a long duration of storage, greater than a month. Again, with specifically to our permitted NPDES farms, they're mandated to have 6 months for storage or more. And so the qualifiers are relatively low bars. And those qualifiers are based on storing manure at a depth that generates anaerobic conditions naturally in storage and for a long enough time that methane is generated. And then those emissions are released to the atmosphere. So it's really kind of saying, this is what my methane emissions are from my manure storage and setting us into that. The things that modify what my CI score might look like, ambient temperature. So again, our temperature here is pretty variable across the year. Our warm summer months, our manure storages are very active, and our cold months, they're crust over and potentially freeze over at times. So where you're at in North America has a major impact on what your baseline modifier is. So again, if I'm in Arizona, my lagoons are probably 20 degrees warmer all year round than they would be here. And so there's a significant change in CI score based on that. Clean out frequency and timing. So again, the baseline is, you're emitting what you're emitting today. The less frequently you clean out your manure storage, the more potential there is to emit methane from that manure storage. If you clean out a manure storage in April, it has less methane emissions than a storage that's cleaned out in October. Again, throughout the summer months here is when really a lot of that biological activity and that conversion of carbon to methane occurs. And so if I clean a storage out completely in April, there's less organic matter in that storage to be converted to methane, and therefore the CI of that practice is lower. Or as I should say it's higher because we're in the negative ranges here. Treatment, anything that I do to take organic matter out of the manure before it gets into the lagoon is going to also reduce emissions from that lagoon. And so solid liquid separation, sand separation, any practice that I might employ on my farm to reduce solids in the lagoon will, reduce odor and reduce emissions to go along with that. And so those are modifiers that will impact a farm CI score. From the digester standpoint on future emissions, the biogas control system, these are the modifiers. Again, what's the production and methane content of the gas I'm producing? So how well is my digester performing? Again, treatment that reduces solids going to the lagoon. So after the digester, I send my digestate to the lagoon. There's still a potential for, there's still a likelihood that methane will be generated from the solids that weren't digested in the digester or the biogas control system. So there's an emission from the lagoon. If I do solid liquid separation after the digester, that reduces the emissions. That actually makes my CI score better by driving it further negative. Covering a lagoon. So again, if I send my digestate to a lagoon that's covered and I collect that gas and utilize it or destroy it, then that also improves the score. Process energy consumption. Again, this is how much energy do I have to put into the process to generate this biogas? Is that energy from a renewable source or from a fossil source? Those factors will modify and change my CI score of a project. And so these are all things to consider as you talk with developers or think about a digester project for your specific farm system. So again, these are my broad brush CI score perspectives. And just to give you a sense of what the economic ramifications are of CI score on a project value. When I look at a farm that has very limited storage, so let's say they're cleaning out 3 or 4 times a year, or they have a lot of solid liquid separation pre-storage, CI score maybe somewhere around 50 to 100. Everything is based on a carbon credit price of 200, but I can see my gasoline equivalent value is somewhere between $3 and $4.50 per gasoline equivalent gallon. If I have solid liquid separation and sand separation, but I have long-term storage, so maybe close to 12 months of storage, and I'm really doing most of my clean out once a year, CI scores are going to be kind of in that 100 to 200 range, and you can see a value jump of $1 to $2 in that gasoline equivalent value. If I had no scrape today and everything went to the lagoon and I had no solids loss, and maybe I was in the southern part of the state where conditions are a little bit warmer than the northern part of the state, I might see CI scores that exceed 200, negative 200. And that's, again, going to push my project value higher because my fuel value goes up. So again, just giving some perspective as to what these manure management practices mean and how the dairies manage and what it means to revenue generation on the eventual biogas. So again, broad brush numbers, but I want to calibrate some perspective for our dairy farms in the state. 3,500 cow dairy, energy potential somewhere around the range of 250 to 300 MMBTU a day. So that's heating value. Project costs, again, very wide range here because one farm is not the same as the next. And so, and one farm may be sitting on a pipeline and one farm may have to virtually pipe to or truck gas to a pipeline. So project costs are a wide range, maybe $5 to $12 million would be reasonable. Operational cost is not insignificant. Again, there's a lot of consumables that go into making renewable natural gas. There's a lot of energy that's put into the process. Energy can be a problem. Again, you need a lot of electricity or natural gas to run the processing equipment. So operational costs are not insignificant in the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, but the revenue is significant. You're looking at, again, depending on how the gas is marketed, the value of the gas that's derived in the CI score, again, a wide range, but we're really looking at significant revenue generation. In a lot of times, I would say almost 100% of the time, the return on these projects is well above 10% annually. And so they are significant potential revenue and money-making projects. There are there are a lot of off-takers out there. Again, when you think about the petroleum industry and the fossil fuel industry, there's a lot of importers, a lot of refiners, and a lot of distribution networks that are willing to provide long-term contracts. So 10-year type contracts and beyond potentially to purchase this gas. And so, you may, by the longer the term of the contract may erode some of the revenue potential, but it does then take some of the risk associated with state and federal policy out of it. So there are off-takes out there. There are numerous factors that impact the value and opportunity. Again, as kind of in the prior slides, farm size, proximity to a pipeline, to other dairies, the baseline CI score, and on and on and on, will impact the value and the opportunity to do a project and do a project successfully from a finance standpoint. Because you see returns where they are, and there is a lot of private equity that's out there and that's willing to deploy into this space. And so farms can do projects on their own. There's complications that go along with that, and finding an off-taker, an off-take agreement, connecting into a pipeline. There's private equity that can come in and more or less do the project soup to nuts. They can invest 100% of the project value or be a partner with a dairy. But again, when you start to see returns where these projects look like they should be, it does attract different money than what we normally would see in agricultural markets or spaces. When you're looking at evaluating partners, you really need to understand the qualifications and the experience of the team. As an engineer with a lot of experience in dairy, with an animal science degree as well as engineering degrees, there are not a lot of dairy engineers out there anymore. And so, there's not a lot of horsepower when it comes to having qualifications and really experienced people on the team. And so you need to be really selective in finding a team that has some knowledge base in the dairy industry and in manure management. You want a history with dairy projects. You want engineering understanding of dairy farm operations. You also want to look at the fund strength and the track record of that equity partner or fund deploying capital and getting projects built in a timely manner. And so you need to spend some time and really do your due diligence because these are big investments. They are long-term investments. And so you're hooking your wagon to a horse, and you want to make sure that horse has got legs and can run for a long time. Project investment strategy. Again, when you start to see proposals come, and there are a lot of different forms and shapes of these proposals that are out there in the industry, the values are widely different from one to the next. There are lump sum propositions, they are net revenue, they are gross revenue. All of these have different implications in what the eventual cash flow is to the dairy or the farm side. And so really assess and evaluate what these different value propositions are, how they incentivize you and the developer to work together. Ask a lot of questions in this space. Ask questions about the developer or the partner's long-term strategy. Are they planning to be the owner and operator of the facility for the life cycle, which could be 10 to 20 years? Have they or are they interested in building the project, getting it online, and then exiting the project? Again, that can change the dynamics and can change the value proposition to the farm side. Understand your impact and equity, or the impact and equity of what you're going to receive based on kind of those different propositions and long-term strategies. Projects are complex. There may be requirements to do manure processing and treatment to get a project on site from one set. Another developer may come in and be willing to do all of it. Where these lines are drawn and who takes responsibility, of bedding management, maybe sand separation, who takes responsibility of fiber separation or post-digester separation, they have ramifications and they have impacts on how you do your dairy business. And so you need to kind of look, down the road and anticipate, is that the right move for your dairy? Is that the wrong move? There may be pressure to change beddings. So you really need to think about this holistically and how it impacts your dairy and how you foresee your dairy operating 5-10 years down the road and where you want to be and what you want to be. Again, manure and biogas transport. We have a really nice pipeline network in the state of Michigan. It's really nice because there's pipelines in a lot of rural areas. It's challenging because the pipeline requirements are not the same. You could work with one pipeline that has an oxygen requirement of 5 parts per million, and another pipeline operator might allow 10,000 parts per million of oxygen into the line. Those are wildly different requirements. To make a project successful, you may have to move gas or you may have to move manure. Again, what does that mean in our situation and setting here in the upper Midwest? We get snow and ice. Life's not always nice. Neighbors don't always like manure on the road. Is it easier to move gas? Is it easier to move manure? Think about these things again and think about them long-term and how they're going to impact your dairy business and your long-term goals. So takeaways, manure, as I said, is a super easy material to make gas from. I can hand it to my kids and they could put it in a bottle and they could blow a balloon up and start a fire with it. Get it in a tank, keep it warm. It will do its thing. I think this is a tremendous opportunity for the Michigan dairy industry as well as nationally. But you need to think about the impacts on your dairy operation. They will not be insignificant. There will be changes that will have to happen on the dairy or the dairy management, the dairy operation style that will have long-term impacts. And you want to make sure that you're maximizing your value proposition so that you can justify modifying your practice and operating with a partner on farm that you might have never had a partner on the farm, that the decisions you make are going to impact how their system operates and vice versa. And so it's just a relationship that needs to be equitable and needs to be fair and needs to be well thought out. This is one of the times when you really need to seek legal, financial, and technical guidance to make sure what you're seeing fits what you want and is is a good value to you and is the right fit for you. And then you do need to think about some state-specific challenges. And this is kind of as an industry where we need to spend some time. We need to work with our partners at Eagle and the Public Service Commission to align some policy in the state to make projects that are more viable for our dairy industry and for our swine industry and other livestock. This is as I said, this is a great opportunity for Michigan dairy industry, but it's a great opportunity for Michigan to have all of these renewable energy sources popping up on our dairy farms, really with no state dollars being put towards it. We really need to make sure that we have good paths to getting projects built in a reasonable time frame that protect our stakeholders and citizens, but really make our industry greener and more renewably and more sustainable long term. And so we've got some policy things that can make project development easier and better. And it would be a real benefit for everybody in the state of Michigan. Closing slide, and I just kind of tossed this in. There's a topic around about how we manage milk in digesters. We receive milk here at Michigan State, and we actually have received milk at various times over the last 3 or 4 years. It is a good biogas source. As you can see here, I would expect 11 to 14 feet or 14 cubic feet of gas for every pound of volatile solids from milk. Again, there's a lot of fat, a lot of sugars, a lot of protein. Compare that to milk or to manure of 5 to 8. So there is a significant gas potential. It does change how the system operates. And so again, if you drank 2 big glasses of milk, your stomach might not feel very good. So we do need to be careful biologically, and we need to allow some acclimation, and we need to ramp supplies up when we're using milk or other feedstocks. We need to give the biological system time to acclimate. And then when we're pull it out, we actually need to give it a little bit of time to kind of ramp it back down as well. Rapid changes could cause foaming, could cause just instability of the system. So you might have fluctuations in gas production. Milk does also generate additional hydrogen sulfide. So again, there is some sulfur in the milk. And so you just need to plan for and accommodate how you use gas and how you manage that hydrogen sulfide. And there's additional costs to removing hydrogen sulfide before you convert it to renewable natural gas or electricity. Also remember there's significant water with milk. It's 85% or more water. So plan for that in your storages. I get in trouble because sometimes we take too much here and our storages fill fast. But again, figure in and account for that water balance. Make sure you consider your permit implications. So again, NPDES permits have some language around this. There are impacts on on different permits, and just make sure you're educated and you've communicated with the appropriate parties, your nutrient management provider, Eagle, Department of Ag, whoever it is. Get consultation and make sure you're handling it the right way. And then do remember there's impacts on gas potential or gas value. If I'm producing D3 RINs, I don't want to take milk in because it's going to take me from $1.30 a RIN down to 50 cents a RIN. And so how your gas is being marketed and used would dictate whether you even consider using a product like milk or other food processing residuals. And so, communicate that, discuss that with your partner or partners or your energy off taker, and just make sure you're informed before you use it. It is a good product to use. It's a great outlet for materials when we have unexpected circumstances like we do right now with COVID, or when we have processing upsets or processing changeover. It's a great outlet for products rather than just sending it to the wastewater treatment plant or just dumping it in a lagoon. We can at least collect the gas potential off of it and convert it into renewable energy, and then the residual ends up back as fertilizer. So we do kind of recycle and reuse it, but just be mindful of how you do it. With that, I guess I'll take any questions.
Thanks very much, Dana. Excellent. The burning question for me is, do you really let your kids fill balloons with methane and start them on fire?
No, I usually fill the balloons and they just hold the lighter as I squeeze it out.
I think my kids would like to quarantine at your house.
Yeah, you got to keep it exciting.
So one question I have, just from thinking through this, and some of this could come down to partnering with somebody that manages a piece of this, but you gave an example of a 3,500 cow dairy and kind of putting some things in perspective in terms of costs. How many full-time equivalents, would you think about for a system like that to just manage it day to day?
Yeah, and that's an area, that's a great question. That's an area where we have failed traditionally as an industry. We've built a digester and we really haven't considered operating it and really integrated it into how we operate a dairy. To do it right, in a 3,500 cow dairy example, you probably need, 2 to 4 operators. Early on, maybe a little bit less because the system's new and there's less maintenance to go on with it. But you really, because of the revenue and the investment that's out there, you want to make sure that system's operating at peak performance all the time, and you want to make sure that your manure is getting processed and not backing up in the barns or anyplace else all the time. And so having it staffed at least daily, 7 days a week, I think is pretty critical, which means you've got to have probably 2 people minimum, and then you've got to have somebody for time off. There is a lot of maintenance that goes into it. So again, how maintenance is, if maintenance is done by a third party, then you would have less FTEs. If you're taking on maintenance on the farm or with the operations team, then you need to bring that labor force onto that team. So 2 to 4 would probably be the minimum. And it could be as much as 6, again, depending on the size and complexity.
And again, pure ignorance question. I mean, does the lead for that team need to be a mechanical engineer? I mean, kind of getting at what these people would need to be paid.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would suggest having the lead, have some basic, probably undergrad education in biology or engineering or environmental science or some sort of mechanical discipline. And then have some additional training. I mean, we offer continuing education training here for our AD operators. Wisconsin Oshkosh does, American Biogas Council does. So you get that continued operator training and development. But we just, it's a biological system, it's a mechanical system. So you have to have different skill sets on the team. The lead doesn't necessarily have to have all of them, but they do need to be a manager of people and organized to keep preventative maintenance and do the record keeping that's required to generate these high value credits. So a lot of disciplines, but a lead that has some really good people skills and some base knowledge of at least part of the system.
That makes sense. Thanks. So one other question came to mind. You threw up a table that I'm sure you could have spent all day on, kind of talking through the different types of systems. I'm just curious, if you look into your crystal ball, 10 years from now, are there one of these that are kind of in their infancy that you could see fitting really well in a dairy? Or do you think the sort of systems we have now are likely to be the ones we'll see for decades?
Yeah, I think, I guess my crystal ball would be, we're gonna have 2 systems that dominate in the US. The covered lagoon because it's inexpensive and simple and fits dairies that flush and have high volumes of water, fits swine really well. And then we're gonna have complete mixed systems where we have more control and we can heat and do better things, especially in a cold northern climate. Crystal ball though, because of the value that's here and we wanna squeeze out, I mean, this is actually a time when we wanna squeeze out the maximum amount of biogas. I do think we're gonna start to look at using more additives to kind of manipulate the biological process and maybe not change it, but at least make sure that nothing is deficient in the manure mix. So when we look at Europe, they've had high energy values for biogas for as long as we've had ethanol here. You know, they'll have nutrient supplements and trace metal supplements that they put into the digester to just make sure that nothing is deficient. And they really kind of feed the digester like you would feed a dairy cow in that case. And I do think we will start to shift and treat and think more along those lines. And we'll just get more sophisticated in how we control and the data we collect from these systems.
Excellent. Dana, thanks so much. I learned a ton this morning. I think some of our viewers certainly will too. Thanks again for your time.
Good, thank you.
So long, everybody.